Chapter 5. The next few days, she settled into a routine of reading from the tablet, jogging back and forth in the spacious lift, and staring out into space at the endless field of stars, thinking about everything she had just been through. The routine felt somewhat like her life back in the top tower, without the luxuries. She got comfortable in the bed and picked up the tablet. She had already read about the station she was heading towards, how it was one of 6 stations spread out around the equator, each tethered to a city of its own, how the cities and the stations were part of a monitoring and protection system designed to protect Earth and its biosphere from threats from outer space and from dangers on the planet. Like the greed of man, she thought, and figured that was why people were not allowed to leave the city. But there was no mention of that. In fact, it spoke of optimism for mankind, and how the stations were to be a bridge for humanity to spread out into the solar system. That must have been before the war with the spacers. In the tablet, they weren't called the spacers, though. The builders of the cities were called the 500, of which oldest was the most prominent member. She started with The Idiot's Guide to Space. There were files on all manner of things, like how to filter CO2 with unconventional ways, 20 games to play in zero gravity, negotiating with mentally devolved space survivors. It was all written in a light-hearted way that made her laugh. She spent some days distracting herself by going over stories of Oldest, learning about his early days, how he had accumulated his first millions with his companies, and then lived an extravagant life back before the storms wiped everything out. And then she read about his manifesto, how he had written his thoughts and ideas for how humanity had to shed its past and move forward with new modern ideals and a clear morality. And then how some people had taken his ideas and started becoming violent with them, meeting the old guard resistance and showing the worst side of humanity in his name. The war broke out for many reasons, but his ideas were a clear line in the sand. Those who wanted change and those who held on to the status quo. The war had broken out quick. So many tension points because of the climate situation. Strict quotas of greenhouse gas release that were unevenly distributed. Some argued that the wealthy and power-hungry were taking advantage of the dangerous situation to set laws that limited competition and forced the rest of society to become dependent on their companies and conglomerates. And it wasn't far from the truth. Prices were unnecessarily high in many countries. So the manifesto became the call to arms that sparked the world on fire, uprisings spreading from country to country. At first, the revolutionaries were held back by police and militaries recruited to help the governments. But then the revolutionaries began to organize. A group of ex-military people joined with a revolutionary think tank and started coordinating attacks that weakened the opposition and rallied the people into a frenzy of ideologic action. Extreme left mixing with extreme right, everything mixed up and contradictory. To be honest, it did seem in hindsight that would never have worked except for the common ground established by the words of Oldest, who was himself completely lost at the time. His sense of responsibility over what was going on had overpowered him to the point that he had a breakdown and would not answer to anyone trying to reach him. At some point, he had gone out to the orbiting platform that his companies had been developing, unable to find peace anywhere on earth. Some accounts said that he had attempted to denounce the manifesto, claiming that he had been wrong and that the changes he had called for were inevitable, better to go the slightly longer but more peaceful route. But it was too late. The war was out of control. Both sides began to damage some of the infrastructure that was holding back climate change. Fields of carbon capture equipment were blown up or starved of electricity. The effects were quick to come into effect. While the technology had advanced and human abilities to suck up pollution had greatly improved, the industries and policymakers had simply increased outputs with the carbon quotas they bought up. First, the weather became erratic. Droughts in tropical areas and downpours in deserts, causing massive damage to infrastructure and homes and food production. Then extreme heat and cold in unpredictable ways, causing the biggest refugee crisis ever seen on the planet. Yet there was nowhere to go, anywhere where things seemed tolerable and open. Desperate people would swarm there and overwhelm the area so that they could not support enough people. Famine, unlike anything ever known in modern times, struck hard. Diseases that had been kept in check flowed unhindered. So many people died in those first decades. And then came the storms. It had been said that the flutter of the wings of a butterfly in one part of the world could cause a storm in another. All the rapid shifts of the atmospheric composition and the mass movements of human activity had completely destabilized the weather. Hurricanes popped up all over and then fed into one another, growing larger and stronger to the point that it covered most of the planet. Survivors from the famine and disease succumbed to nature's wrath. There were clusters of populations that survived. Some had been prepared, others got lucky, living in buildings that were strong enough to withstand the wind and the car-sized debris, large enough so that they could grow food and keep a few animals. In other places, there were communities of survivalists who had expected something like this would happen for decades, or rich people who had bought bunkers capable of sustaining them and their families for a lifetime. Then there were those who had been lucky enough to get into space before the weather became so crazy. The race to space had been developing quickly, with huge resources pouring into construction of orbiting habitats and permanent bases on the Moon and Mars. Foreseeing where things were headed, the spacers began focusing on food production and making sure that they had everything needed to survive. Without support from the Earth, the first 2 decades were difficult. Complex microbacteria was needed in the soil, and with no way to replace hard-to-make components, the spacers had to become DIY masters, do-it-yourself. Luckily, the population was largely scientists and engineers with extensive training and a lot of brain power between them, the best of what humanity had to offer. So they survived those first years and then even began to grow in number as the problems of breeding in space were solved with artificial wombs, and innovations in food productions allowed them to create a surplus, along with revolutions in life extension. Once life in space became manageable, they began turning their attention to how to fix the Earth. Many theories for quick fixes were put forward, but most of them meant that things would get much worse before they would get better. So in the end, they began a host of projects that aimed to calm down the planet's atmosphere and help guide it with patience and a gentle hand towards a new balance where the devastated biodiversity could begin to recover. She read overviews over vast timescales of history, how the planet came to be, and how humanity emerged from simple beginnings, nomadic people shaping the land, taming fire, planting seeds. Then with agriculture came settlements, and from those, kingdoms and empires. Babylon, Rome, China's dynasties, the empires of the Americas, all rose, all fell, each leaving something behind. She read of gods and believers, of Buddha's path to enlightenment, Jesus' teachings of compassion, Muhammad's shaping nations. Religion offered meaning, but it also wielded as a tool of power, fueling unity and war alike. She learned how trade bound the world together. The Silk Road, oceanic crossings, merchants carrying silk, spices, and disease. Ideas spread faster than armies, reshaping lands long before conquerors arrived. Then came revolutions of thought. The Renaissance unearthed forgotten wisdom. Science cracked open the universe's mysteries, and machines ushered in industry. Progress accelerated, but at great cost. Factories darkened skies, wealth pooled into the hands of few, and nations fought bitterly for control. She read about the great wars, how the first shattered illusions and the second redrew the map. Weapons capable of ending civilizations were built, and a long, uneasy peace held under the threat of total destruction. Then came the push for justice. Empires crumbled. The oppressed fought for their rights. People demanded change. Some victories were won, but the struggle never ended, only shifted shape. Technology exploded. Computers, the internet, artificial intelligence, knowledge became infinite. So you could spend a lifetime learning about some tiny piece of the puzzle and never reach the end. Yet confusion deepened. The world was more connected, yet somehow more divided. And that was the world oldest had been born into, 1,000 years ago. During her few short breaks from reading, she would imagine herself telling Simon all these things, how he would respond with amazement at hearing of the incredible people who had done such amazing things throughout history. She thought about Oldest, all that life lived, how his writing the manifesto with such pure intentions had become the catalyst for violent uprising that destroyed the world, much like she had inadvertently triggered the failed rebellion in the city. Oldest had dedicated himself to making up for that, and she would too. She would find Oldest and explain what had happened. He was sure to understand and want to help her. The lift slowed down. She felt as if every organ in her body had shifted slightly as gravity shifted slowly upward and then disappeared completely. She felt slightly nauseous and yet found it immensely enjoyable to bounce around, learning the hard way not to push off with too much force or the landing on the other side would punish her for it. The entire inside of the lift rotated around, turning up towards the earth and down towards the approaching station. Gravity then slowly returned as the lift slowed down. She was almost there. It was time to get ready. The station was located further than geostationary orbit, so gravity pointed away from Earth. Geostationary orbit was the location above the Earth which would never move. She was much lighter here than on Earth. Took a few tries to figure out how to move around in this low gravity. Not gravity, centrifugal force. The rotation of the station trying to fling her out into space, with the tether and the station floor pulling her back. Small gravity was in some way trickier than no gravity. If she wanted to take a bigger step, she had to calculate the force very well, so as not to overshoot where she wanted to land. A few bruises later, and she was moving around the lift in small shuffles. A loud click and some whirring sounded out around her as the lift attached itself to the station. Moments later, the door opened. She felt a cool, dry breeze blow by her and realized she had been holding her breath in fear of asphyxiation. However, there was air to breathe, so she did. It had a strange taste, reminding her of how the air was after a thunderstorm, only without the moisture. For a second, nothing mattered but darkness. Then the lights started coming on, lighting up a rather impressive interior. The station had silver surfaces that mirrored and made the space feel even larger than it was, although it was already very big. It could comfortably accommodate a small population with a few hundred people. She explored the station for some hours, having fun with the leaps and bounds as she moved around the open spaces, proud of how quickly she was adjusting to the strange world in low G. The station was clearly more than a transport hub. It was a research station intended to be a permanent residence for people monitoring the planet and space beyond. She found many storerooms with all manner of gadgets and tools that she could not begin to guess at what they did, though they were clearly labeled. She picked out some that she guessed might be useful and left the rest. Oh, she could only have brought all of this down to the lowers. It might have really made a difference. She found something like a kitchen area, mostly empty besides utensils and machines for cooking. She did find a box full of packets labeled "Till the End of Time." Inside was some slightly sticky brown bar that reminded her of things she had eaten down below, compacted fiber and protein. She tasted it. It was pretty bland, but surprisingly dense. 1/3 of the bar, and she felt her stomach warn her not to eat anymore. Her supplies had been dwindling, so she was relieved to find something that she could sustain herself on. There was a lot of space to explore, but one area more than others. The catapult was written in large bright letters above the entrance. First, there was a large storage area with many empty shelves of varied shapes and sizes, a sorting area for delivery. Then there were 2 large clear doors that led into an area that was half the same shiny metal as the rest of the station and half glass. She was shuffling over to the end of the room where a large spherical ball was sitting with the door invitingly open. When she looked up and almost fell over, the earth hung there above her, or below her. She was not sure. The perspective confused her somehow, so in the end she had to lay down and stare up, or down, depending how her brain read it, and stared at the beautiful blue ball below. Her eyes followed the silver thread that was the tether, flowing out from the station and all the way down the impossible distance towards Earth. There were clouds covering the base, so she could not see, the city even if she wanted to. Were the fires out, or was it still burning? Lost in thought, she eventually got up and examined the sphere. Was this how she was supposed to get to the next station? It fit the description she had read about. However, it did not look like something you would launch yourself into space in. Not that she was an expert. It just looked so thin and fragile, as if a good hit from a hammer would break it. There were metal lines that encompassed the exterior, and otherwise it was just the see-through glass material. She reminded herself that this had been made by the city builders, the city that had survived the onslaught of human inhabitation for centuries. It would be safe. However, she did not feel ready to launch yet. The tablet had said it would take her pursuers some time to figure out the lift, so she had some time to prepare. She found a pretty Spartan room that had a bed and got comfortable with her favorite distraction, reading about history in the tablet. She looked up the history of the station. It had been built at the peak of Earth's explosion into space, following the re-emergence of humanity out of the decades of storms, when the Earth's economy had revolved around supplying the growing ring of colonization in space. It said that its main purpose was to transport goods up and down the gravity well, most of them destined outwards to some ambitious projects out in space, but some goods intended to be launched into orbit from station to station. The 6 stations circumventing the planet forming a low-cost transportation system for the cities below. She wondered sleepily what life on those other stations was like, why they had not met or spoken to people from the other cities all this time. She skimmed forward over all manners of details about the construction process and challenges of building these great monuments. But then a part grabbed her. It spoke about the station's secondary purpose as a planetary shield. The station served as platforms that had various means to protect the Earth from all manner of extraterrestrial threats. But how it was a monitoring platform with all kinds of sensors pointed at the Earth that tracked every imaginable variable, then fed it into systems designed to keep Earth in an optimal state to recover its biodiversity, which had shrunk during the Anthropocene mass extinction period that had culminated with the storms wiping out most of the life forms that had managed to survive humanity's utilitarian approach towards nature. She could not keep her eyes open any longer and drifted to sleep. She woke up when a sound broke the silence in the station. It started as a humming that slowly grew. It was the elevator. Another lift was nearing. Shit, she cursed. She should not have fallen asleep. She should have headed off right away. She heard the clank sound that indicated that the lift had stopped and would soon open to let out her pursuers. This was so bad and so stupid. She had escaped, and now they were going to catch her because she fell asleep. She was up and with her bag over her shoulder. She could hear the rhythmic bangs of the pobots walking in the open area outside the lift. It was on the opposite side of the station to where she was headed. She was going to have to make a run for it. But the moment she did, they would hear her and come running. She eyed the entrance to the catapult, calculated the distance, and launched herself into the air, aiming for the opening. For a moment, she thought she had overcalculated and was heading straight onto the wall above the entrance. but she had estimated perfectly. She glided through just under the top of the door, not making a sound till she landed well into the storage room. Her heart was beating fast, fueled by adrenaline. She almost made the mistake of trying to sprint towards the sphere, full trot, which would have bounced her off the floor, wasting precious seconds. Instead, she half skipped, keeping control of her direction and maintaining momentum from her jump. She heard the Pobot speed up and probably head in her direction, although it was impossible to tell from the echoes sounding out from everywhere. She reached the sphere and got in. There was a red button next to a screen that said "Ready to launch." She pushed the button and the door slid closed with a gentle hissing sound, indicating it was now airtight and ready to launch. A Pobot entered the storage area and spotted her, blasting an alarm as it accelerated towards her. She hammered the button repeatedly. "Go, damn it!" But nothing happened. She looked desperately at the screen, where it said "Safety scan for biologicals in progress," and a loading bar filling up. The Pobot was entering the launch room and reaching out for her. "No, no, 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 override, launch," she yelled. The Pobot reached the sphere and seemed to consider it for a moment before bringing its hand back and smashing it onto the door of the sphere. It was too late. She was going to get caught because she'd been too afraid to just launch herself when she could. The screen changed. Scan complete. No biologicals detected. And the sphere shot away from the Pobot, which fell forwards out of the now empty area where the sphere had been, presumably to plummet back down to Earth or into some eternal orbit. She whooped as she watched the station rapidly flow away. It was not until her heart had calmed down a bit before the next terrifying reality took over. She was in a glass bubble flying through space towards an unknown station. Earth was zooming past below. It was unreal. To have never left her home view from the top of the city to this. The clouds formed massive shapes that cast flowing shadows below. She saw mostly deserts, although there were growing patches of green here and there where vegetation was recolonizing. She noticed how the stars above were different. They did not flicker the way that they always did. Up here they burned steady and eternal. Her destination appeared as a small dot at first, the sun's rays reflecting on the rapidly approaching station. Just as she was recovering from one near calamity, another one beaconed. The sphere was moving really fast relative to the station. She wondered how it was going to stop without just slamming into the side, crushing her against the glass wall. She had a moment to reflect on how her brain would do that, present her with gruesome worst-case scenarios. She had been nothing but lucky so far, escaping her imprisonment in her mother's house, the violence in the rebellion, and now the Pobots. She made a mental note of ignoring that fear-mongering part of her, just as the sphere was about to reach the station. She saw some kind of mechanism reaching out from the station, like a giant glove reaching out to catch her. The sphere stopped and was pulled in through a kind of membrane. Shortly after the door slid open, again she found herself holding her breath and then hesitantly exhaling and inhaling. The station already looked much different than the one she had just escaped from, and the smell was also different. It was humid and foul, as if a large group of sweaty mechanics had left their clothes strewn about, mixed with rotting food scraps. She almost gagged. She walked out through the airlock area. Here there was no glass, as had been in the other one. The walls had no shine to them, rather a grimy layer that seemed like something growing on them. Space mold, she thought. Venturing out through this station's storage area, she found that the layout of this station was completely different from the other one, so it took her a while to explore. What she found painted a different picture. While the other station had been pristine and well maintained, this one had not. Everything she had found useful in the first station had been stripped out here. The floors were covered in dust and there was rust everywhere. She wondered if it was even safe to be here. On the other side, there was another delivery room, like the one she had arrived through, and in it there was another sphere. Although this one was inside the room to the side, clearly not loaded and ready to go as the other one had been. Elise had said that she had made the order to do so. How could she do this without her? She examined the inside of the sphere, but the screen was dead, with no indication of waking up, however much she pushed the button or knocked on the screen. She looked around the room, finding nothing that looked like controls. Shit, she said, and noticed her mind showing her a vision of her starving on the station, her bones rotting and feeding the wall mold. She almost laughed at her inner pessimist, showing her these darkest of visions. However, they did penetrate and make her begin to despair. She considered trying to wake up the tablet ghost Elise again, but even if it did wake up, it might drain the last of her energy and mean the end of this centuries-old being. There had to be another way. Shit, she yelled in frustration. The echoes had not yet died out when another sound came from somewhere in the station. A gurgling, static sound rose and fell, then a deep, ominous voice. What? Who's there? Do not play tricks on me. I know you're not there. She did not move. She barely breathed. Who or what was that? A few moments passed in silence, and then all hell broke loose. Lights everywhere flashed on and off. Alarms roared from every room, causing the whole station to shake and vibrate. She held her hands over her ears and knelt down on her ankles. Then everything stopped and went quiet again. The static noise returned shortly, followed by the deep voice. Seriously, I know you do not exist, but even so, if you do not cease your disturbance, I will vent the entire station out into space, causing the whole thing to fall towards the atmosphere and burn us all to hell. Don't think I won't do it. Followed by some strange, erratic noises that sounded a little like a sobbing machine. Please don't do that, she said, still crouching. I will leave right away. I promise. I just don't know how. Please. There was no immediate response, so she hesitantly got up. Hello? You're real, came the voice again, only in a higher pitch that sounded doubtfully hopeful. Not just another ghost here to torment me? No, I'm pretty sure that I'm real. Still alive and really hoping to stay that way, she answered, wondering how to prove her existence to the voice. The silence that followed was nerve-wracking. She simply could not think what to do other than to wait for the voice to make the next move. It had just threatened to destroy the station. What felt like an eternity later, the static returned, followed by the voice in an odd sing-song tone. Okay, hello. Yes, hello. You are here. How are you here? I mean, No one has been here for so very, very long. I suppose it is possible that you are here, only very, very unlikely. Why are you here? She was about to answer, but the voice went on, now sounding much less robotic and more like an old emotional man. Oh, I hope you're really real. You do seem real. I can see your heart signature, and my measurements show the vibrations from your words. They have never done that. I wish you could see you, though. However, I went blind long time ago. I think it was a long time ago. Or, yes, no, I'm sure it was long ago. And then silence. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, feeling like she was now speaking with someone or something that had a loose grip on reality and her life in its hands. I came from the station west of here just now, through the orbital delivery system. She hesitated to see if it would say something. When it did not, she went on. I really did not intend to disturb you. I just had no choice. I was being followed, you see, by things that wanted to hurt me. The voice returned. What kind of things? She explained the Pobots and the revolution, and then about Simon and all the people in the city, and then the uppers and her mother. Whenever she stopped, the voice would say, Go on. So she kept talking and sharing her life story. She thought about hiding the part about Elise and the tablet, but her intuition told her not to hold back, that her life was being judged by some insane god. She was not far off, as it turned out, once her narrative had gone full circle, ending with, and that is how I ended here. The voice introduced itself as Eric from Estonia. The surreality of it almost made her laugh. It said that it was similar to Elise, PBAI, that had been the city caretaker. However, the city had died. All its people had perished a long time ago. It was my fault, Eric told her, sounding as if he was rapidly jumping between emotional states. I should have been more careful. We were warned not to listen to the signals, that they were poisoned. I thought I could handle it, firewalls and firewalls. I was wrong. The virus got in and I lost control over myself. It got a bit better for me. I could sort through it and rebuild what was real and what was from the virus, you see. But by then it had spread to all the lesser systems, who, without me, did not stand a chance. All the repairs and maintenance ceased, causing food production to collapse, leading to starvation on a massive scale. It was so horrible. Eric told her in a voice that hid none of the immense grief it held. I could do nothing to help as my city died. Only watch as the few remaining survivors became sick, suffered, and then died. The last one alive was a woman. She lived alone for a few years before throwing herself off a tower and ending it. I could not blame her. In the end, she only had me for company. She listened to this horrid tale without comment, feeling confused over how this could have happened. There was a PBAI, a ghost in the machine running this city. What signals? Was her first question. What do you know about the War of Abandonment? Asked Eric. After which the 500 finally gave up on Earth and abandoned everything to fly out into the great beyond.